I'm joined today by the Nevada Stray Cat. We met recently on Blue Sky and wanted to spend some time talking about our experiences riding things with two wheels or three wheels.
Thank you very much for having me, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for joining me. So, you have a long history of riding motorcycles, starting from when you were about 6 years old, and now just a few years later, you've evolved from two wheels to three, and you've started making travel logs from the seat of your Can-Am Ryker. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you got started riding things?
Sure. I should probably clarify that when I was 6 years old, I was not riding. My father was riding, and I was riding pillion. I didn't actually start riding for myself until I was 16 years old. We lived in the Great West, and as my travel logs show, the Great West has a lot of nowhere to get in the middle of. And so I needed a vehicle to get back and forth to school. And we couldn't afford a car. So what I got instead was a hand-me-down Honda CB350 that needed a little bit. And we did the work together. And then I started riding that Honda CB350. And that was some 40 years ago. This last year, I did, in fact, move to the Can-Am Ryker, which is a reverse trike, if you're not familiar. It's got two wheels in front, one wheel in back, which is much more stable than the more traditional trike arrangement that you see with for instance, Harley-Davidson, who really pioneered the whole trike motorcycle thing. They get mad props from me for helping, for instance, disabled veterans continue to ride, get out on the road. But they have a one-up, two-back arrangement on their trikes that is less stable and is prone to flipping when you turn too fast.
Wasn't aware of the stability question and how different they were. When you were researching, tell me a little bit about how you decided on the Can-Am Ryker.
A number of years ago, I was leaving the hospital, and I happened to walk through a shopping area, and there was a guy with a very early Can-Am Spyder, and it was just parked. He was sitting there at an outdoor cafe having lunch, and I stopped and I stared at it, and I looked around for who had a motorcycle helmet. And I saw him, and I started asking him questions about it. And he said that it was, just a tremendous ride. But at that point in my life, my wife and I still owned 4 motorcycles. And I was very focused on that whole wheel. So it kind of went into the back of my head. And it wasn't until after my wife died, I didn't own those 4 motorcycles anymore. I was chronically ill and had balance issues and couldn't ride a two-wheel motorcycle anymore, that I started thinking, well, how do I do this? How do I get back out on the road? And if it's entirely honest time to be, a big factor in choosing the Can-Am Ryker was the fact that a Harley trike cost $40,000 to $50,000, whereas the Can-Am Ryker cost me about $11,000. At the time, I thought I was going to be living in a mid-sized city and doing most of my riding in town. And so the Can-Am Ryker, which is an in-town, riding around town kind of bike, a trike, was the appropriate choice rather than the Spyder. Things didn't work out in that mid-sized town, and I ended up living in a teeny tiny little town in middle of nowhere, Nevada, where everything that I want to get to is at least a 2-hour drive away. And in this situation, I'd really like to have the next trike up in the Can-Am line, the Spyder F3, particularly the touring version of it, the Spyder F3T, or I guess I should say the sport touring version of it, the Spyder F3T. It may be a couple of years before I can afford to make that transition.
Great. So now the first motorcycle I ever rode was a Honda CB100, and it was my dad's. And my brother and I had this semi-brilliant idea of trying to convert it into a dirt bike. So I've got to ask what happened to the 350, because those bikes, those old CBs are really, really beautiful bikes.
Honestly, I have no idea. What happened was the CB350 belonged to my dad. Um, I rode it. It was my bike. And then I went off to Germany as an exchange student my senior year in high school. When I came home, I joined the Navy. I have no idea what happened to that bike. Um,
Ah, okay.
maybe my dad sold it. Maybe he passed it down to a different relative. Oh,
So one of the things that we talked about when we were getting ready for this conversation was how many different places you've ridden in Europe and on the East Coast and the West Coast and the Midwest and the deserts. What's your How do you compare and contrast those? What do you like about all of it,
that's a
or
really
each of
good
them?
question. So as the poem says, there's that poem about Monday's child is blah blah blah, Tuesday's child is blah blah blah. The poem says that Thursday's child has far to go, and I was born on a Thursday, and have spent my entire life living up to that having far to go. So I have lived in all kinds of places and ridden on, and to put it all into perspective, I think I'd have to say that every road is itself. You can't you can't expect the road that you ride today to be the same as the road that you ride next week. And even if it's, technically the same road, it's not
Hmm.
the same road. The weather conditions are different, your mental space is different. It's always a different road, it's always evolving, and whether you're riding through the Alps between Switzerland and Germany, or you're riding the coast of Japan. Every road is different. Every road has its own thing to bring to you. Every road has its own thing to teach you. And the best thing is to be there in the moment, learning what that road has to say to you.
So true. Uh, as you know, I did a 112-day trip last year, and people inevitably ask, "What was your favorite place?" or "What was your favorite part?" And I find it so difficult to compare riding in Death Valley to riding in Glacier National Park or the Icefields Parkway in Canada. They're all so different, and it's hard to even say which is the most beautiful because they're all amazingly beautiful in their own way. And I can't say that any two of them are even close to each other.
I have to say that I am incredibly jealous of that trip that you took. I have been watching your videos as you roll them out, and at a person of a certain age, being a chronically ill person, I have to start thinking about end of life issues. I have to start thinking about, is this the last time that I'm going to do X, Y, Z? And I would love to do one last really grand road trip like that. Um, as I told you in our introductory conversation, when we were getting ready for this, we were getting to know each other. The very first road trip I ever took was when I was 17. I was an exchange student in Germany. Some friends of mine were going to take this road trip down to Rome on their motorcycles. And I lamented to them that I would really like to go, but I didn't have a motorcycle. And their response was, "We have one you can borrow." And so I
Those are
ended
some
up.
good friends.
Some of the best friends I've had in my entire life, actually.
Yeah.
Uh, but we ended up going from Göttingen, which is just about smack dab in the middle of Germany, all the way down to Rome on motorcycles. Um, and that you can't compare or say this was a better trip than that was, with obvious exceptions, because if you rode home from Salt Lake City and there was a thunderstorm and you ended up drenched from head to toe, you can say was not such a great ride. But my point is, I can't say that multi-day, multi-week trip with my buddies in Germany was better than any of the road trips I took with my late wife on the Pacific Coast Highway. But I can say that it is one of those glittering, shining moments, that will live in my mind as long as my identity persists. That I took this trip, that I took those trips, um, and I think that I really would like to have one last grand road trip, and the one that you took, I'm jealous.
I am so fortunate to have been able to do that, and it's not lost on me how lucky I am to have been able to spend that much time and to travel to that many places in one trip. It really was a life changing experience. Um, and so I wanted to ask you then, in some of the places that you want to go, what are some of the places that are still on your list that you'd love to ride?
Well, just looking at the United States, because of my condition, because of the world condition, just narrowing it down to the United States. I have a niece who is only 14 now, but in a couple of years she'll be 16. And I am hoping that when I upgrade to the F3T, I can take my Ryker and give it to her, and then we can go on trips together. And because she
Nice.
lives in East Tennessee, obviously the first thing that I think of on trips that I could take with my niece is the Tail of the Dragon, which is right there on the Tennessee-North Carolina border.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that it would just be a hoot. Part of my shtick, obviously, is that I'm all gear all the time, including when I'm doing my talking head moments. And I think that it would be fun to get my niece in all of her gear and have the Nevada Stray Cat and the Tennessee Stray Cat, and both of us be in all the gear, being talking heads at the camera. I think that would be a hoot. But even above and beyond that, I've never done the Tail of the Dragon, and it seems like it's a good time. And even though, as a new-ish rider, I wouldn't take her, in her first 6 months of riding, but as a new-ish rider and as an old-ish rider, it would be fun to do it together and then talk about our experiences and our perspectives, um, as Uncle Niece, but also as a YouTube personality. I think that would just be a great time. So there's the Tail of the Dragon. I would really love to do so. As anybody who has watched my videos and seen my riding jacket and understands what they're seeing on the back of my riding jacket knows, I am a huge fan of a video game called Fallout 4. And Fallout 4 is set in the greater Boston area. And I would love to take my trike and ride around and look at the real world places that inspired the places in the video game.
Okay.
So that would be tremendous. But also, are you familiar with the Lincoln Highway?
I'm not.
Okay, so starting in many years ago, I'll look it up later and put it in the notes. Um, the Lincoln Highway was one of the first transcontinental road routes established. And it goes all the way from New York City to somewhere in Southern California. I forget if it's San Diego or Los Angeles. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is, it still exists and it still gets updated. When roads are closed, when roads change, they update it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I would love to follow the Lincoln Highway all the way from Times Square out to California. Or, given where I live these days, the reverse. Take it all the way from California out to Times Square. I think that would be a tremendous road trip.
It would. It would, and also I think when we talked to you, had mentioned, or when we last talked to you, had mentioned the Mount Blue Sky Scenic Byway as some place that you really want to go as well, but it's closed this year,
It's
as we
closed
know.
this year. The Mount Blue Sky Scenic Byway is the highest road in the continental United States. It goes over a 14,000-foot peak, and
Hmm.
apparently the cell reception up there is spotty. You gotta really go up there knowing that your trike is in good condition, that you are in good condition, that you're gonna make it up to the top and you're gonna make it back down, and not have any questions about that. Um, uh, and that again, that sounds like a really good time as a writer, and it also seems like it would make a good video for my channel.
So when you're riding, or when you're planning a ride, what is it that you look for in a road? Are you looking for long stretches? Do you like the tight twisties? Do you like mountain cliffs or along rivers? I know for me, I always, when I see a road that travels along a river, I'm excited because I know it's windy, it's not incredibly steep, and the views. I love the sound of rushing water, and I know the views are going to be great. What do you look for in when you're planning a ride?
Um, so I mentioned I was born on a Thursday, uh, and it's not an accident that I have adopted the name Stray Cat as part of my nom de YouTube. Um, I have never in my life not been able to look at a road that I have not traveled and go, where's that go? And so what I look for in a road is a road that I haven't traveled. Um, a road that I can ride down and see what's down there. Now, the immediate impetus for my doing my channel was that I have spent the last couple of decades working mostly on the East Coast, in the last 10 years in Tennessee. And when I came out west, or came back out west, I started sending photographs of the places that I was traveling through back to some of my friends, particularly my friend Mandy. Hi, Mandy. Um, who had never been west of the Mississippi, or who had just barely been west of the Mississippi. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and their reaction was generally awe at how big the West is, and how empty it is, and how much nowhere there is to get in the middle of. Because that is a thing that you just don't experience in the same way when you live in the East. Um, and so, as a YouTube host, as the Nevada Stray Cat, what I'm doing, what I'm looking for, is places that convey that sense of scale, that convey something that people who live back east have not necessarily seen. For instance, the next full-length video that I've got coming out is relatively short, but it's about a trip to a ghost town. And that's something that, I mean, ghost towns exist in the East, but not anywhere to the same extent. Um, so that's something that people who live in other places won't necessarily have for, and I would like to share that.
So I wanted to ask, I've in Nevada, I've ridden a little bit. I went through Valley of Fire State Park and down into Las Vegas and to Hoover Dam and then over to Death Valley. So I didn't really didn't ride much in Nevada other than that southern corridor. What are some of your favorite? What are some of your favorite rides in Nevada, and what are some of the favorite places you've been there?
Um, so again, I kind of have to confess that I grew up in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I went to university at Northern Arizona University. If I were being completely honest, I should probably have labeled myself the Arizona Stray Cat. I just happened to have sort of accidentally ended up in Northern Nevada instead. And so I've only been here since November of 2024. And my rides have been pretty much limited to very utilitarian going places kind of things. And so right now I don't have a huge bank of experience from which to draw. Can say that I had a very good time riding out to the Ghost Hill of Gold Hill, Utah, which is right across the Utah state line. I live in Wendover, which is literally the state line goes right through the town. Gold Hill is right across that state line. And I had a good time riding out there. The geology, and this is actually something that I am kind of struggling with right now on my channel, is that I have this camera, but it's an action camera, and it's kind of focused on the immediate area around the camera. And a lot of the things that I want to show, the things that I want to share, are the incredible vistas, the amazing distance, and how clearly you can see something that's 10 miles away, or the incredible, the geologic striations in the rocks on the side of the road. And I'm struggling with my photography skills, with my photography equipment, to be able to convey that. And that trip to Gold Hill is a lot like that. Is I rode past things, and I keep my camera behind me, and you can see me just staring off at something. But then when I try and frame that in a shot, it's like, oh, there's a hill. Why was the cat staring at the hill?
I think it's the perennial challenge of anyone with a camera, that as soon as you put a frame around something that you're looking at, you can't capture it all. I remember standing at in Glacier National Park and in Canyonlands, and just trying to take a picture to express how big it is, and you just can't, right? You just can't. I know I have two cameras. I have one camera on the front of my bike that captures the road, and I've been experimenting with a second camera, and I've tried it on as a chin mount, which I don't particularly like because I have a modular helmet. So every time I put the helmet up, the weight of the camera makes it fall back down. Yeah. And so I've just, on my last day trip yesterday, I experimented with it with putting that camera on a pole behind me, which was pretty good and kind of fun. As I noticed, over about 30 minutes, the pole started falling from the weight of started dropping because of the weight of the camera. And so it started out as an overhead shot, became a shot over my right shoulder. But that was interesting. And I think the only way to capture all this is with multiple cameras because there's so much out there. Every time I go on the road, I find myself looking through the front camera and thinking, oh, but there's some amazing wildlife over there, and not being able to share that with people who are viewing because there's too much.
Which is one of the reasons why I use the 360 camera, is that I can go in later and reframe the shot and drift off from that centric point of view to looking off to the right, to looking off even looking behind me. But
then you can't get the distance as much as you would like.
Exactly. And so I'm still struggling with that. Part of it is that I don't have the budget for a second camera right now. We'll see what happens down the road.
I had on my trip, I was coming down from Canada back into Glacier, and a rock had hit the front of my camera and cracked the lens, and there was no way I was going to go through Glacier and Yellowstone without a camera. So I ended up buying a second one. and then getting the first one fixed and finding out that all I really needed to do was change the cover, the lens cover on it, and it would have been fine. But so now I ended up with two cameras.
Which it sounds like is working out for you.
So far, so far. I also wanted to ask the Pacific Coast Highway. You had mentioned rides along the Pacific Coast Highway, and I found that to be such a really interesting road and such a varied road from the southern point where I picked up the Pacific Coast Highway in Santa Monica, right at Santa Monica Pier, and I rode north through Malibu and Ventura and then up the coast. And there's that section just south of Big Sur that's still closed. And it was beautiful, but it was so different than what I saw north of San Francisco, and that was so different than what I saw, up in Oregon. Where did you go on the Pacific Coast Highway? What were some of the places that you remember riding there?
So I have ridden the Pacific Coast Highway all the way from Los Angeles, the California-Oregon border.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it in company with my late wife. We were living in Alameda, and if you think about the geography of the San Francisco Bay as being sort of a backward C, right? You've got San Francisco over here, you've got Marin County over here is Oakland. Right there is an island in the bay, and that island is called Alameda. And originally it was a summer escape from the heat of the city for the rich folks in San Francisco. And so it's got a lot of, century-old, or now century and a half old Victorian construction, much of which has been subdivided into apartments today. And so Sarah, my late wife, and I lived in a studio apartment in a subdivided old Victorian in Alameda, and we would ride out throughout the Bay Area and even beyond. One particular day, I was riding the GSX 750 I had purchased when I was in the Navy. She was riding the Ducati 888 that she had wheedled out of her parents. When we met, we were already both riders. So the two of us were riding our sport bikes, and we would go all over the place. But this particular day, that I always remember very fondly, we left Alameda, went across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco, and then decided that we didn't really want to do a lot of urban riding, so we went across the Golden Gate Bridge, and we went up on the one. And we got up to a little town. We stopped for gas. We decided to get lunch. And we just pulled into this place that had a patio and tables out on the patio. And we hung our helmets on our handlebars, and we draped our jackets over our tanks, and we went and ordered, and we were sitting there on the patio to get lunch. And this group of a dozen sport bikes roll up. They're pulling into the parking lot and parking near where we were parked. And these guys were all riding. I mean, these were serious. These were leader bike super bikes. And they were wearing, full leather suits and full face helmets. And, in those days, the comm systems and the chin mount cameras, not really a thing. It was still a good decade away from any of that. We had a great time talking with them about the road, about our bikes, about our experiences. And that's what I associate with that ride with that Pacific Coast Highway, more than the experience of riding along and looking at the ocean and thinking, hey, this is great, and I'm sharing it with my best friend who also happens to be my wife. Though that is incredible. And there were many, many rides that we shared together that I look back on and think, what I wouldn't give to be able to get back out on the road with Sarah one more time.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think of the Pacific Coast Highway, the first thing that comes to mind is always that small town, that little cafe, and those guys who rolled up and joined us for lunch.
Nice. I think that's one of the nicest things about the motorcycle riding community is that we're all motorcycle riders first, and that shared bond of enjoying the time on two wheels is, doesn't matter where people are from. It doesn't matter if they're from the Northeast or the Southwest or New York or San Francisco or anywhere in between. There's just such a a bond and a willingness to help. I think, I don't know about you, but I've been on the side of the road a couple of times, and someone has always stopped.
That's one of the reasons that I do the whole motorcycle helmet thing, is that if I am out of my helmet, and you see my face, I am a person of a certain age. I have a chronic illness that sometimes affects the way I look. I am a certain ethnicity. I have a certain amount of hair. It's a certain color. Consciously or unconsciously, people have opinions about all of these things. And I really want to keep the focus of my channel on the trips that I take, on the bike, and not so much on the rider. And so by accepting the veil of anonymity, I can be anybody. And I hope that it makes me easier to relate to if you don't happen to be the same age or the same ethnicity. There's nothing I can do about my voice and the fact that I'm a double bass. But I hope that I can make it easier to approach by being just a guy on a motorcycle rather than, all of that other baggage that comes with my appearance.
One of the things I particularly enjoy and take away from my trip is the ability to connect with people regardless of where they're from, because wherever they are, wherever they live, I probably rode close to there, and I found something beautiful, fun, exciting, unique about where they live. I remember sitting at a hotel in Lexington, Kentucky, and thinking about going down to the Red River Gorge and having the woman who was working at the hotel say, "Oh, if you go to Red River Gorge, you need to take the sky lift or the sky ride up to the Natural Bridge Arch and walk across there, and then you need to go to Miguel's Pizza for lunch and go through the Nada Tunnel." And I'm like, "Oh, great! Now I have a day. Now my day is planned. I know exactly what I'm going to do today."
So, probably not so quick anecdote. Sarah, my late wife, one of the things that she found less appealing about me is the fact that I never don't talk to strangers. Uh, we were in the subway. We were going home, and I saw an older lady staring at the map of the subway system and looking perplexed. And so I stepped over and I said, "Hi."
That can happen in New York.
I said, "Hi, where are you going? Where are you trying to get to? How can I help you?" And, I showed her on the map where we were and where she needed to change trains and what exit she needed to get off at. And then I talked a little bit about some of the things that she would find in that area and how to find the museum she was looking for. And we talked for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes about New York City. And I stepped back over to where Sarah was standing, holding up a pole. And she looked at me and she just shook her head and said, "Do you ever not talk to strangers?" And I had to laugh because the answer is no. That's not the way that my mother raised me. Strangers are just friends you haven't met yet.
You told me that you have been to every continent on the planet.
I have. I was in the Navy, and at one point I was on board what was at that time the largest ship in the world. And we couldn't go through the Panama Canal. We had to go all the way down around Tierra del Fuego. So while we were down there, my helicopter squadron was assigned to take the mail bags from the ship down to the McMurdo Naval Air Station. And I got on board the helicopter through shenanigans. There was some very intense rock, paper, scissors played to see who got to get on the helicopter. I got on the helicopter. I flew down to McMurdo. We got off the helicopter. I handed the bags of mail over. I got back on the helicopter, flew back to the ship. That was it. That was my grand Antarctic adventure.
So I have to ask, do you remember whether it was rock, paper, or scissors that won?
It was a bottle of $150 scotch used as a bribe.
You've also lived in a lot of different places. You mentioned North Carolina and Albany and New York City and Flagstaff and now Nevada. Which place do you see as the most fun? Which place do you see as the most scenic?
So if I had an unlimited budget, and you said to me, where would you like to live? I'm a city cat.
Okay.
My choice would be where you live, Manhattan. Manhattan is an amazing place. It has more cinemas, it has bookstores, it has everything that makes life worth living. And it's in close proximity to some really great rides, the Palisades Highway, the Hudson River Line, great rides. Which one was the most? Probably living in Alameda, because all of that geology out there is heavily influenced by the faults that run through the area, and so you can be on one side with the ocean, and on the other side with a cliff that goes up 1,000 feet, and you can see all of the different geologic layers in it, and it's just beautiful. Yeah.
Well, now, so as a New York City person, I agree with you that I love New York City, and it is a wonderful place to live. The one downside as a motorcycle rider is that whenever you want to go anywhere,
you have to get out of the city.
You have to first get out of you have to first get out of the city. And that can take anywhere from 12 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes.
It can be a hoot even just to ride in the city. New York has some of the best architecture. It has some of the best public art. It has some of the best trash piles. It can be a hoot just to ride in the city. But, I think one of the best days that Sarah and I had was we actually took our bikes on the Staten Island ferry. While we were on the ferry, we just sat there on our bikes and we had a picnic lunch right there between the two bikes. And we watched the waves, and then we got off and we, rode around Staten Island and went, ooh, ooh. And then we got back on the ferry and went back to Manhattan and on back up to the Bronx. And that was a great ride. It was a great day. Little hair raising. Sometimes taxis will do things that you would never expect an automobile to do.
Yes.
But we were on very powerful motorcycles that were very nimble. We were very experienced riders, and we could get around the taxis if we needed to.
Great. So I have two questions, two final questions for you. One, the first is, it wouldn't be a conversation about motorcycles or two or three wheeled vehicles without an obligatory question about Farkle. And so, what have you done to your Can-Am Ryker to make it yours?
So one of the great strengths of the Can-Am Ryker is that there is a huge aftermarket market. There are all kinds of modifications. And to date, because of my budget, the only sort of visual thing that I have done is that there are two color panels on the Ryker that are forward of the handlebars. When I initially purchased mine, I purchased it with gloss black panels, thinking that later I would replace them with something else that I liked. It turns out that the something else that I liked was carbon fiber, which is it looks either gray or black depending on who's photographing it. So it doesn't look in photographs very interesting, but I like the way it looks in person. And when I got my Ryker, I had the selling dealership install what's called the max mount, because I had this idea that I was going to go on rides and maybe I would have a passenger who wanted to ride pillion, maybe my niece, maybe a friend who was looking really hard at getting into motorcycling. And so I had that passenger seat put on. And then I realized that the circumstances of my life are such that I'm not ever going to ride somebody pillion. So I took that passenger seat back off and I put a matching carbon fiber patterned cowling behind my solo seat. So I have the three pieces of carbon fiber pattern, and to me, it may be low key, but it says that it's mine.
Nice.
Everything else that I have done to the Trike has been utilitarian. I put on a cruise control, which you're riding 2 hours to Salt Lake City, that cruise control is a risk saver, let me tell you what. I put on the aluminum skid plates on the underbody because the Ryker only has 4 inches of ground clearance, and I did in fact tear the nose fascia on an ill-advised trip across a dirt road. And so, trying to think if there's anything else significant that I've done to the track, and I don't think there is.
My final question for you is, so I've seen your videos, and I know that you've done some videos at Bonneville Salt Flats, and you mentioned you're working on one for some ghost town trips. Where can people find you, and how can they follow your adventures online?
So my primary outlets right at the moment are Blue Sky, which is a sort of nonpartisan, de-smurfified version of Twitter. My handle there is Nevada Stray Cat. For me, you'll find me. And YouTube, where my handle is also Nevada Stray Cat. Again, you search for the 3 words, you'll find me. If you search for, Can-Am Ryker, I'm probably in the top dozen results.
So any other final words or any advice for someone who's getting interested in motorcycling or interested in Can-Am Rykers, or any other thoughts about riding?
To a new rider, I would say do it, but do it safely. Take the Motorcycle Safety Foundation basic rider course, get your license, get insured. 6 months a year down the road, take the advanced rider course. Follow your bliss, but follow your bliss safely, sanely, responsibly. To anybody who is interested in the Can-Am Ryker, who has ridden a motorcycle before, who maybe has some health issues, maybe has some mobility issues, I would say do it. It gets you back out on the road. It's 85% of the experience of motorcycling with about 15% of the worry. To somebody who's looking at the Can-Am Ryker who has never ridden before, again, I probably would say do it. Can-Am says that 1 in 4 Ryker riders has never owned a motorcycle, and it is a very good introduction to experience of motorcycling. And if you decide that the trike isn't quite right for you, you want to move on to a two-wheeler, more power to you. If you decide, like I have, that you want a bigger version of the trike, mazel tov. It's just, life is short. Enjoy it while you have it.
That's great advice. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I really appreciate it. We covered a lot of ground and a lot of various topics, and I really appreciated hearing your perspective and your advice. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a great pleasure talking with you. In my life, being a person of a certain age, having, the closest all the way on the other side of the country, having my wife having passed, I often feel isolated. And talking to you today has been a great experience of being able to connect with another human being, and I appreciate it.